The day my father left, the sun rose like it always did, bright, golden, full of promises we no longer believed in. Papa kissed Mama on the forehead, ruffled my little brother's hair, and gave baby Thandi a soft kiss on her cheek. "I won't go far, Zandile," he said. "Just to the edge of the bush. I'll be back before the sun sets." He never broke a promise. Never. So, when the sky turned dark and the stars came out, I kept watching the road, waiting for his silhouette to appear. Thandi cried, hungry, and Mama rocked her softly. She didn't say anything, but I saw her glance toward the door, her lips moving in silent prayer. When the news came, it wasn't Papa's silhouette we saw. It was our neighbor, limping and breathless. The words he said didn't feel real. "A lion," he stammered, his voice shaking. "Thabo didn't make it." Papa had gone into the bush to bring us food and never came back. Mama collapsed, clutching Thandi so tightly the baby screamed. Sifo held Mama's shoulders, but the rest of us, Nomsa, Jabu, me, we just stood there, frozen, unable to cry. That night we sat in silence, the weight of Papa's absence hanging over us like a storm cloud. There were 8 of us crammed into a hut that could barely hold 4. Mama called it home, but it didn't feel like one. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the floor was just packed dirt that turned to mud in the storm. We slept close, shoulder to shoulder, our breaths mingling in the cold night air. I was the middle child, 3 older, 4 younger, including baby Thandi, who cried more than she laughed. Sifo, the eldest, took charge after Papa was gone. He woke up before dawn to tend the fields with Mama and stayed up late watching over us. Nomsa, the second oldest, kept the little ones in line. And me? I was the dreamer, the quiet one. While the others chased chickens or argued over scraps of food, I sat by myself staring at the sky. I loved to imagine things, a world where we didn't have to fight for every meal, where Mama didn't have to cry at night when she thought we were all asleep. I imagined I could fly, that I could take my family to a land where everything was easy. Mama noticed things about me that no one else did. She saw the way I stared at the sky, lost in my thoughts. One night, after a long day of working the fields, she sat beside me. "What are you thinking about, Niva?" she asked, her voice soft. "A world where there's enough food for everyone," I whispered. "Where you don't have to work so hard, Mama." She smiled, though her eyes were tired. "You have a gift, Niva. Your stories will take you far. Don't let this world take them away from you." I didn't understand what she meant, but her words stayed with me. Hunger was always with us, like a shadow we couldn't shake. Our meals were simple, thin porridge made from maize meal, sometimes wild greens if Mama found them. On special days, we'd share a roasted sweet potato, savoring every bite like it was gold. Mama often pretended she wasn't hungry, giving her portion to Thandi or the younger ones. "I'm fine," she'd say, but her hollow cheeks told a different story. One night, Nomsa found me crying. I couldn't stop thinking about Mama going hungry for us. Nomsa just hugged me and said, "We all do what we have to, Niva. Even Mama." Mama didn't know much about letters or numbers, but she believed in education. Every night after the fields were done and the little ones were fed, she turned our hut into a school. She'd write letters on the dirt floor with a stick, teaching us the alphabet. "A is for apple," she'd sing, even though we'd never seen one. When we had nothing to write with, she'd hum songs to help us remember. I loved those lessons, even though my hands ached from the day's work. Mama's voice was the closest thing we had to hope. One day, while selling vegetables at the market, I overheard 2 women talking about a library in a nearby village. I couldn't believe it. A place with books, and they didn't cost anything? I begged Mama to let me go. "Please, Mama, I need to see it." She hesitated, but finally said yes. The next morning, I walked barefoot with Sifo for miles, my heart pounding with excitement. When we arrived, I couldn't breathe. Shelves of books stretched across the room, the smell of paper and ink filling the air. It felt like I'd stepped into another world. The librarian, Mrs. Delamini, smiled when she saw me. "Do you want to learn how to read?" she asked. I nodded so hard my neck hurt. She spent hours teaching me, her voice patient and kind. When I left, she handed me a book. "This is yours now," she said. I held it like it was a treasure. But that book changed everything. I read it over and over, sometimes to myself, sometimes to my siblings. And when I wasn't reading, I was writing. Stories about flying girls, magical kingdoms, and brave families like ours. Mama called me her storyteller. "Your words have power, Niva," she'd say. "One day, they'll change the world." And the rains came in the middle of the night, pounding on the tin roof like an angry drummer. I woke up to the sound of Sifo shouting, "Get up! The roof's falling!" We scrambled to the corner of the hut as water poured in through gaping holes. The wind howled, and baby Thandi wailed in Mama's arms. Sifo, Nomsa and I held the younger ones close, shielding them with our bodies. By morning, the roof was gone. The fields were flooded, and the little crops we had planted were ruined. Mama stood in the doorway, looking at the mess, her shoulders trembling. "We'll rebuild," she said, her voice firm, but her tears falling freely. That day, we began gathering scraps of tin and wood from the nearby village. Sifo worked tirelessly, hammering pieces together with tools borrowed from a neighbor. It wasn't much, but by nightfall, we had something, a roof that didn't leak, held up by hope and determination. The weeks after the storm were the hardest. Baby Thandi's cries became weaker, her tiny body burning with fever. Mama tried everything she could, cooling her with damp cloths, feeding her weak broth made from boiled weeds. But nothing worked. One morning, Mama wrapped Thandi in a blanket and told Sifo to watch us. She left the house without a word. Hours later she returned, her face pale and her hands empty, except for a small bottle of medicine. I noticed her left hand was bare. Her wedding ring, the last piece of papa she had, was gone. She had sold it to save Thandi. That night, as Thandi's fever broke and she finally slept, Mama sat by the fire, staring at her empty hand. I wanted to tell her it was okay, but I didn't know how. Instead, I hugged her, and she whispered, "Anything, for my children." Sifo was only 12, but he was already the man of the house. One evening, after we had finished working in the fields, he sat down next to Mama. "I won't be coming to the lessons anymore, Mama," he said quietly. Mama looked at him sharply. "Why not?" "There's too much to do. If we're going to survive, I need to work full-time." Mama's face crumpled. She didn't argue, though. I think she knew he was right. From then on, Sifo spent his days in the fields and his nights fixing tools or checking on the animals. He worked harder than anyone, but his smile grew rarer, and I missed the brother who used to tease me and make me laugh. With the tattered notebook Mrs. Dlamini had given me, I began writing my first story. It was about a girl who could fly, a girl who carried her family to a land where food grew on trees and the rivers were made of milk. When I finished, I read it aloud to Mama by the fire. She closed her eyes as I spoke, a soft smile playing on her lips. When I finished, she opened her eyes and said, "You'll go far, Niva. One day, the world will read your words." I didn't believe her, but her faith in me made me want to try. A neighbor told us about a writing contest being held in a nearby town. The theme was overcoming challenges. Mama encouraged me to enter, even though I was nervous. I poured my heart into the story, writing about our struggles, our love for each other, and the hope Mama carried for all of us. When the results were announced weeks later, I was stunned. I had won first place. The prize was a small amount of money and a certificate, but it felt like the start of something bigger. Mama hung the certificate on the wall of our hut, beaming with pride. The writing contest caught the attention of a journalist who visited our village to interview me. He asked about my family, my dreams, and how I found inspiration in such difficult circumstances. When the article was published, everything changed. People from nearby towns sent books, notebooks, and even small donations. For the first time in my life, I felt like the world was listening. One morning, a letter arrived from a school in the city. They had heard about my story and wanted to offer me a full scholarship. Mama cried when she read the letter aloud. "This is your chance, Niva. You carry all our dreams with you." Leaving was the hardest thing I'd ever done. As I hugged each of my siblings goodbye, I promised them I'd make them proud. Sifo handed me a small pouch with coins he'd saved. For emergencies, he said. I couldn't stop crying. The city was overwhelming, so loud, so fast, so different from the quiet life in our village. At school, I struggled at first. The other students spoke English fluently, while I stumbled over my words. But I worked harder than anyone, spending hours in the library reading and writing. Slowly, I began to catch up. The stories I wrote about my family became my strength, reminding me why I was there. In my final year of school, I submitted a collection of short stories to a publisher. To my amazement, they agreed to publish it. The book was called Under the Stars, and it was dedicated to Mama, Saifo, and Mrs. Dlamini. When I received my first paycheck, I sent most of it home. Mama used it to fix the roof, buy seeds for the fields, and send the younger ones to school. At the day I returned home, the entire village came to greet me. The little ones ran to hug me, and Mama stood in the doorway, her hands trembling. "You did it, Niva," she said, tears streaming down her face. I hugged her tightly. "We did it, Mama. We all did." With the money from my books, I built a library and community center in our village. It was named Zandile's Place in honor of Mama. On the opening day, I stood before the crowd and said, "This is for every child who dreams of something more. This is for Mama, who taught me that words can change the world." That night, as the sun set over the fields, I sat with Mama under the stars. We didn't need words. Her smile said everything. We had made it, not just out of poverty, but into a life full of hope, love, and possibility. As I looked at the library glowing in the distance, I whispered to myself, paradise isn't a place. It's the belief that we can create something better even from nothing.